Hello, welcome to my channel. Today's video, I'm going to be covering in great detail the most accurate method I know of to mount a scope on a rifle. I've been gunsmithing for coming up on 40 years now, primarily dealing with 1,000-yard rifles, competition rifles of all sorts, as well as accurate hunting rifles. And the methods I come up with through the years that are very reliable, very repeatable, are what I'm using, and I'm going to be showing that in this video as far as mounting scopes go. This will probably be a two-part series, at least a two-part series. And the first part's on the base, how to mount the base to the receiver. The second part's on the rings, how to fit the scope to the rings properly. There's more than one way to do this stuff, and the bases, especially if it's a two-piece, a two-piece base, or even a one-piece like a rail like this one's got, the Picatinny style rail on there. When they go onto a receiver, they're base made one place, receiver made somewhere else. They don't fit very well a lot of times. Sometimes really bad. So you take a base like this one-piece base, and you tighten it up, but the receiver's not lined up exactly to match what the base is, and it generally is not. You actually force the base into a slight bend. The rings on top of that base get pulled apart or twisted, or however they are. Therefore, the scope does not fit in the rings very well. I'm going to show you how to account for all that stuff. The base, I'm using epoxy to epoxy bed the base to the receiver. The base is you can put epoxy between there and tighten it up, and yeah, maybe help a little bit, but that's not really the optimum way of doing things. So I'm going to be showing you what I believe anyway is the proper way of doing this. And the second part of the series of the next video is the rings themselves, how the scope fits the rings. That you can lap the rings. That's a standard way of doing things. People have done it that way forever. It works. It helps quite a bit. It's not the perfect way of doing things, because you had rings that were large enough to take the scope. It means it's larger than the scope, and then you lap them, which makes them larger yet. So therefore, you may take some of the twist and flexing, and you're forcing into the scope out of it, but still, it's not a perfect fit. So I'm actually going to be glass bedding the scope into the rings, showing you exactly how to do that too. And that works awesome. And that's how all these 1,000-yard rifles, competition guns over the years that I've done, just universally, that's the way I do it. And then hunting rifles also, I do it that way on hunting rifles. So anyway, I'll have all this stuff, plus a bunch of other stuff actually in an online course that I'm putting together on that'll be available on my website. GordysPrecision.com or ExtremeAccuracyInstitute.com is my website. But anyway, so I'll have this stuff plus a bunch more info on that, on my online course when I get it finished on my website. So anyway, follow along, like and subscribe. Follow my channel here, because I keep posting these instructional videos like this, and glad to have you along. Thank you. I want to go through mounting a scope and showing some of the things I always check when I do these things, especially for accuracy. You can mount a scope on a gun and get it to shoot, obviously, but there's so many better ways of doing things, and one of them is just getting the scope mounted stress-free. In my opinion, anyway. I don't know. I'm no scope expert. But I think an awful lot of scope issues where guys send scope back to the manufacturer saying there's problems and stuff like that, I think a lot of those are mounts induced rather than a bad scope. If scope's not, it's a metal tube and got a bunch of internals in it, and if it's mounted and forced and flexed, that's got to cause problems inside, I would think. And sometimes these mounts do not line up very well, and you torque or tighten up the scope rings down into that and put the ring caps on, and the bottoms of the bases are not sitting level; they're sitting cocked. You're going to force that scope into a bent position. You can actually measure that, the effect that it has on guns. I've done this several times, but you set a gun set up in the vise with a fore end in the vise, the back end on the bench is held front and rear, kind of like you're holding it. Just put a dial indicator up against the barrel about halfway down, and loosen and tighten the front action screw. And there should be, if things bedded properly anyway, should be very little or no measurable flex there, no measurable stress. And now go bolt a scope down in and tighten it down tight into the rings, and now measure. And you got more flex. Well, something's happened. When you tighten that scope down, you're forcing the scope into a bend, and you have the old equal and opposite reaction thing happening, and it's putting that stress down into the action. And now when you tighten up loosen and tighten the ring, the scope, since it's forced into a flexed and bent position, it flexes the action and pulls it up out of the bending when you loosen and tighten the front guard screw. That can definitely happen. So I like, when I mount a scope, especially, I want to make sure all the stress is gone from it as best I possibly can. I got to give you a little brief overview here of what I'm going to do. I'm going to do some checking and mount the scope and show you that. The base first. I like to glass bed the bases to the action, unless they're really close. Or you get a good high-end custom action. They get the scope base built to match the action, or better yet, integral with the action. But those are usually not much of an issue. Boy, these factory guns, and you get an action made somewhere and a base made somewhere else, they don't really mate together very well. You get just the action, for example. They're a steel tube. That's by the time they're machined, you got the loading port in there, the ejection port in there. They're polished, which takes metal off. They're heat treated sometimes. That the actions flex. Well, now the mounting surfaces are no longer lined up to each other very well. Now you take a base that's made somewhere else. How good is that base? How straight and true is that thing? So one way to check that works really well. I'm going to grab a dial indicator here a second. I'm going to put just a dial indicator on and just loosen the screws at one end, and then tighten the screw down and back it up. We'll see once if there's any flex in there. You can measure it. So you'd be amazed sometimes just how much of that there is. So I'll put the indicator on here. I'm just using a little stare at last word indicator. I've used these for years and they work really well. So that's what I'm going to use on this one right now. So, okay, make sure I got plenty of adjustment all the way past zero. I'll kind of set it about on zero here. And now I'm just going to make sure the front screws are tight. There they are. That one is. That one is. I'm going to take the back screws out. So right there, I flexed just a little bit already. Let me see if I can see it in the camera. Make sure my hand don't get in the way of the camera here, but there's a couple thousandths right there with that screw. Get that screw up and out of the way. I'll re-zero it a minute. Loosen tight with this screw. A couple thousandths there. So there's, my hand's probably in the way of the camera. So there's just, there's just some stress right there, and that's on the back. So now let's do the front. Let me tighten these back down a minute. And that wasn't too bad, a couple thousandths or so there. That in and of itself was not so bad. But now let's swing it around and get it over here onto the front. Okay, so now, oh, good grief, that would clear off the end of the scale right there. That happens a lot. Let me get this screw out of the way a minute, so where the base is free. Back down, we're starting to read a little bit. See, look at that, it's just horrible. I can't even measure it with that indicator, so let me get a different one here. Get a 1-inch indicator out a minute. I'll have to get that with the other camera here in a minute. Okay, so now, loosen and tighten the over 30 thousandths right there. A little bit more. Yeah, so when I tighten this back screw down, it lifts that whole front of that base up. So that's over 30 thousandths there, it looks like. So Yeah. So anyway, that's not good. If you zoom in on this, on that base, I bet you just physically be able to watch it go up and down. I think you're going to physically just be able to watch that thing raise and lower. That was tight. See that raising and lowering right here? So there's a ton of stress in that whole setup, so that's not good. I'm going to go ahead and bed the base to this action, and then tomorrow, once the epoxy's hardened up, I'll take everything off and degrease everything and put it back on. Then I'll mount the rings, and then we'll check the scope out and see how, what for stress we have with that, how well the scope fits the rings, and probably going to bed the scope into the rings too. That's the very best way of doing it. That way, you get wet epoxy just like this. Just got wet epoxy forming to whatever misalignment there is, filling the gaps, and just makes the whole thing fit absolutely perfect. And then you got a whole solid setup. The way the scope's mounted in the rings, the base to the action, just makes the whole gun more solid, and the stiffer, more solid it is, the better it shoots. The less flex it allows, and so forth. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and get ready to go, or ready to do this, and we're gonna bed this base to the action. Be the next thing we're gonna do here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and take the base off now. Clean everything up, put wax on the action so we don't stick the thing down in there. Also some wax on the screws, make sure we don't. Kind of degrease everything with some acetone. I'm gonna go ahead and degrease the base, especially. I'm gonna scuff it up just a little bit with some sandpaper too while I'm at it. To help the epoxy stick a little bit better. It's just some 150 grit. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it in the camera or not there. But you can really see where the paint's wore off on the front of that. Zooming in where you can see it a little bit there, but the front corner's right here. You can also see here where it's really hard. That thing's, and the screws, when I took them loose, the front screws were not real tight. So I think the thing, every time it shot, the thing was squirming just a little bit and moving around, and got the bluing worn off the action there, and correspondingly off the base too. So not good. Degrease it one more time before I sand it. Let's make good and sure everything completely clean there. Typically you don't need to sand much. You got to kind of scuff up the surface a little bit. And make sure you don't touch it with your fingers again after you've done that. So. Like that. Okay, now I'm going to degrease, or excuse me, I'm going to wax the action, put some release agent on the action. Typically use this Kiwi shoe polish, but it's getting hard to get, so you can also use, like Johnson's paste wax, just some paste wax like that too. Just wax works really well. Normally when I bed actions, beds actions into a stock, then I use a spray release agent most of the time then, but this wax like this works very, very well actually. So little dab of that. I'm going to take the screws, make sure they're waxed also so they don't stick. Now I'm going to mix up the epoxy, And I use this Brownell Acroglass gel an awful lot for this. You can dye it so well. This stuff works. It's a really good epoxy anyway, but you can dye it, and I'm just going to dye it just a dark black so everything matches. And I'll try to get this mixed up where you can see it. I'm going to kind of take an even amount, best I can here. You don't need very much. There's just not a lot of a gap in there to fill. So try just to get a little bit of a line of this stuff, maybe a 1/4 inch wide and inch long, something like that. Try to get about the same amount. Okay, so now it's going to matter to start mixing her up. Now let me get me some dye. And this stuff is about like anti-seize. It gets everywhere. And it won't take much. This is a really good dye and a really powerful dye, and it won't take a whole lot to do it. And I get this from Brownells also. I don't know much about it, but I figure it's actually made for this. So I'm assuming it'd be some of the best options for dye. This I know it's going to mix and not affect how it cures and all that kind of stuff. So, and I know you can get all different colors. So. And it turns black really fast. Okay, we're good to go, I think. Now I'm going to take a little bit and put it on the base. And I want to kind of rub it into that surface. I don't want to just kind of lay it on there, but just want to kind of rub it into the surface just a little bit. And make sure it's fairly thick on there. Because any excess that squeezes out, I'll just clean off with Q-tips and either acetone or white vinegar. That dissolves this wet epoxy. It won't once it's hardened up, it won't do it, but it'll take it off nicely when it's done. Okay, so that's ready to go. Okay, now let's talk about a couple other things here real quick before I put it together. What you're going to do with this gun, what type of scope it is, what cartridge it is, that depends. If it's a long-range gun, what's the trajectory of your cartridge. Now this one here, remember we had quite a bit of movement in there. So ideally, I want the back of the base to be up instead of forcing the back of the base down. So if I tip the back of the base up, that's going to give me a few more minutes of usable elevation in the scope. Nowadays, these scopes have so much more elevation than what they used to have, but back in the day, I used to own and operate the Iowa 1,000-yard club, and we'd have new guys, especially, they'd come, they'd have a 308. And it took a lot of elevation to launch a 308 from out to 1,000 yards. That's so often they didn't have enough adjustment in their scope. This is back in the days of 1-inch rings, an awful lot of them, or some of the 30 millimeters that had a real high magnification. You're pretty limited, 40, 45 minutes of total elevation adjustment in the scope. Well, if you're essentially sitting level on the gun, you've got 20 minutes of that you can use. Well, you need, 35 maybe on a 308 to get to 1,000 yard zero from 100 yard zero. So you put a 20 MOA base. Now you may have most or all of that 40 MOA, but you're going to be maxing your scope out or awful close to it. So, but I just got in the habit of a long range gun just to maximize the elevation. Now you can bed the bases, the back of the base up. Now remember the base, the scope is sitting level at the top of the base. So the scope sitting at the target, you shim underneath the back of the base with the scope base stays level, that pushes the back of the gun down, which points the barrel up a little bit higher. And that gives you a few more minutes of usable elevation. You got to crank the scope knob down to line things up. Well, that gives you more, for a 100-yard drill, for example, that gives you more usable elevation adjustment that you can use for long-range shooting. So it's just kind of nice to be able to do that. So one like this is a short-range, gun, hunting gun, guy never going to get more than past 500 or 600 yards out there. Basically tighten it down even. Long range guns, I'm going to kind of maximize that. So I'm going to put a little extra epoxy underneath that back base, draw the fronts down very gently. I'm not going to force anything, because you're going to force a bend into that base. That base was bent and flexed. So I'm just going to take the screws and draw it down and get it centered as best I can, but just drawn down and just enough to where it draws down snug, and then no more. Just let the epoxy cure. I'll clean the excess off that oozes out around the edges. Let that cure. It's a good idea. I've got one of these old collimators, the old bore siders. It's just an old Bushnell. I bought this thing close to 40 years ago, when I started gunsmithing, and been using it ever since. It just works really good. But it's got a little grid in there, and I checked it before I started, so I know where the scope is, and we're going to check it more. Once we get the base on, then we'll see where it's actually sitting. Then I'll check make sure the tracking on the scope is where I want it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that even now while I'm putting the base on. Kind of get things set up, ready to go for tomorrow. But anyway, so now I'm going to get the scope, the scope mount on here now, draw it down, leave the back end up just ever so slightly, but with no stress at all. It's going to run the screws in real gently until everything kind of bottoms out. Just let it sit that way and harden up overnight. Let the epoxy cure. Tomorrow, I'm going to take the scope base back off, clean all this wax out, and put Loctite on the screws, and tap the holes, get everything all ready to go. And then I'm going to mount the base permanently. And then I'm going to put the rings on, and then we'll fit the scope and check all that. So that's kind of the process that I'll be doing here. So. Kind of getting the base screws in place. Okay, I'm going to kind of start with this front screw here. Kind of get him started, not tight down, just snug it. Start snugging it down. Okay, now I get the second screw on. Just kind of work my way back that way. I'm going to get these screws started anyway. Make sure I don't draw it all the way down, so I don't want to stress anything. So. Okay, and I'm going to draw this front one down a little bit more. I can kind of feel it bottoming out there. Ooze the epoxy out. Now take the pressure off. Instantly, I screwed down it, tightened out until I felt it tighten down. Take the pressure off. Right now, there's no pressure on it whatsoever. Same thing with that second one, to back him off. Now these, I'm just going to take them down until they just start to ooze some of that epoxy out of there. Okay, I'm going to take the tension, if there is any, I'm going to take the tension off of these. Okay, there's no tension at all now, and I mean, just enough where I can feel that the base is down, but I can take it with my fingers here, and you can see it or not in the camera, but I'm just going to be, I mean, I'm no tighter than that. I'm just completely free yet, but I can feel that it's down into place. So the back of there's a little bit more of a gap around the back, but the front's basically sitting down level of the back, whatever it had, I've got about that much epoxy coming around there. If you can see it or not, I can get the flashlight on it here a little bit better. You can maybe see in the camera there, but you can see where the epoxy's oozed out all the way around it there. So now I got to take some Q-tips, and we're going to clean all that epoxy out. kind of work my way around and get rid of any excess epoxy that's oozed out. Now the base is completely stress-free. Tomorrow morning it'll be hardened up, and then we can go ahead and finish mounting it and get the scope on. I'm going to take a little acetone now. When I do stock bedding, I almost always use white vinegar because that's I think a little milder. Never had that affect any stock finish or paint or anything like that. I don't quite trust acetone on some things, but on the metal like this, either one will work just fine. But okay. Very good. We'll let that sit and harden up overnight, and tomorrow we'll take it apart and clean off anything that needs to be cleaned off, and you make sure the screws or screw holes a lot of the epoxy will flow down in around those screws. We'll go through with a drill bit and open that up again a little bit so the screws are free. We'll degrease everything, and including the holes. We'll take the holes, I'll run a tap through the holes, get those cleaned up, and I'll put some blue Loctite on the screws, and I'll go down and tighten her down and put the rings on. Then we'll get started with mounting the scope and bedding the scope into the ring. So anyway, that's about as far as we can go for tonight. All right, the scope base has cured overnight, the epoxy under the scope base. So now I'm going to take the base off, and we'll clean everything up and remount the base on there, and then get ready to put the rings on. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is just pop it apart. If you remember to wax your screws, it should come apart pretty easy. Okay, it should come off of there pretty easy now, we'll find out, but it should just pop right off. A little bit of pressure. Sometimes you got to pry just a little tiny bit here. I don't want to force anything, so just like that. Okay, now you can see the bottom of the base here. Looks real good. See where the hard contact still is in this corner, but then the epoxy fills in more and more here, and a little bit on the edge back there. So now let's clean up just real lightly. Oh, now I'm going to take a number 28 drill bit and finish opening those holes up, getting the epoxy out of the way, where the screws will just drop down through. And you can chuck this up in a drill if you want to, but I'm just going to do it by hand. Usually works pretty easy that way. Yeah, screws go through the holes real easy now, so. So when I drop it in there and just kind of push it down, you see it comes all the way through there, so. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do, degrease these holes, tap them, degrease the screws, put blue Loctite on, put everything right back together. So that's the next step. Okay, I'm going to take just a little bit of brake clean. You can use acetone or something, but I got these little pipe cleaners, and just go down through the holes and just kind of spin them in place there and degrease those. Remember, we had the wax on there, and I didn't clean them out before even I did this anyway. Okay. No brown ales, tap set out here. Okay, I'm going to take my little drill and tap set now, take 648 tap, and just chase the threads, go down through, and be real careful you're supporting this when you're spinning this around. You don't want to bend it over and snap that tap off. But that takes care of all any crud that was in there, any epoxy that may have gone in the base holes. And that front screw is a blind hole that goes down against the barrel thread. So I'm gonna put a bottoming tap in there and go in and clean it up just the rest of the way. Make sure. I think that was a plug tap I was using before. Now let's use a bottoming tap. There she come up against the barrel thread. I like the little Brownells, just a drill and tap kit. I use those for close to 40 years now. They work so good, so I just keeps everything organized. It's nice to work with. A little blue Loctite on the screws. Now, one thing you really got to pay attention to is this front screw that goes down against the barrel threads. A lot of actions. This one was fine. I've just checked it already. I can see the top of those threads right there. But what I still often do, I'll kind of try to show you in the camera here, shown on here or not, but the tip of this screw, when it goes down against those threads, if it goes down against the threads, I've seen it multiple times where I got a gun in here and the barrel or the scope mount was torqued down, tightened down, whatever, and take the back 3 screws out. And even though this front screw is torqued down, the base is loose because the thread is, whoever tightened it up, tightened the screw against the barrel thread, but did not draw the base tight. That happens a lot. So you always got to watch this. Anything that goes into a blind hole, and this becomes a blind hole because there's a barrel thread that goes underneath here. And maybe try to see if I can get my camera zoomed in on that. But then, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this front screw and I'm going to go to my grinder, even though it did tighten down. I'm going to do that again when I put it together just to make sure. But I'm going to take a grinder on the one screw and just grind just a 10 or 20 thousandths. Just take just a little bit off the tip of that screw, maybe half a thread's worth, and just kind of polish the end of it. And that way, if it was tight before, now when I torque it on, if it does go a little bit farther, I know I'm still plenty far away from the barrel thread that it can't possibly go down against there. So I'm going to run over to my grinder here real quick and just take a little bit off the tip of that thread, and then I'm going to try to zoom the camera in. In fact, I'm going to do that now so I don't forget. Now you look down into this hole, this front hole now, and now you can see the thread in there. But that's the crud. You can't see on the other camera here, but that's there's a little bit of crud down in the hole there, but that's the tip of that thread. So now let me go grind this front screw a minute and we'll get her put together. I got these plates from Brownells. I'm going to zoom it back out a bit so you can see it. Just a little screw checker is what that is. Makes it really handy for doing for grinding these, for holding the screws while you're grinding them. So now here's an old one that I've got. See, I can run it in there. Now the screw head, the tip of that screw comes through the hole there, and you can see right around lots and lots and lots of years of grinding screws and everything else on here, but I could just, that way it makes them nice and neat and even and stuff like that when I'm going up against my little buffer over here. So that's what I'm gonna do. Just like that. That way they don't come popping out of your fingers or however you're holding it and go clear across the room where you can't find it. So now I've got the tip of this screw, ground and polished a little bit, but it's done evenly and taking a 10 or 20 thousandths off it now. It probably wasn't 20, but it might have been 10. So now when I look at the tips of these screws, try to get them all 4 lined up here. You can always know, and these screws are all the same size. A lot of times they're different sizes. Then you pay attention when you take them out, which one goes where. But this one, no matter what, I've got the tips of the 4 screws. The 3 of them are still original. One of them's is polished. So that's the short one. That always goes to the front then. So. I put a Loctite on them. There's the shiny one, so it goes up front. All right, let's get them on. Don't really matter which one you start with. I typically start one end or the other, so I'll just start back here. Get that one going down a ways. The next one down, get them started a little bit. Okay, a little bit of play in there now, if you can see in the camera now, a little tiny bit of play. That one tightened up. That totally took the play out of it, so now it's free. Just check all 4 of them there, but now let's leave the front loose a little bit. We'll tighten down the back ones, try to duplicate what I had yesterday, and we'll see the difference here. Yeah, just as solid as can be now. Okay, now, a little torque wrench out here. I'm going to show you a couple different ways of torquing these things. I rarely torque them with the torque wrench. I mean, I start that way and stuff like that. That usually, or often don't get them tight enough depending on how perfect things fit. This would be a perfect fit now. So I get it like, let's say 18 inch-pounds. For example, I can turn this down towards 18 inch-pounds, that one way you want a little bit over. Go down through it a couple times. Okay, this is a little trick now. I don't remember where I learned it, because I've been doing it for so many years now. I'm assuming I probably learned it from if I remember right, from Brownell's Kinks, those gunsmith books that Brownell sells. They're just a whole bunch of different tips and tricks on things. They've got 4 of them. There's Kinks 1 through 4, 4 separate books. I'm gonna grab one and show you a minute. This is Kinks number 4, but it's just got a ton of good information in here, and I was thinking that that's where I've got this info from that I'm going to be showing you here in a second, from years and years and years ago, but it may not be correct. But either way, these are good books. Okay. So this is kind of, I'm going to impact it in. So I've got them torqued to full pressure. This one, since it's been bedded, probably won't do a whole lot, But ones that aren't bedded, man, oh man, sometimes because so the base does not fit the receiver very well, when I impact it, in other words, I go against I probably went another eighth of a turn there. And wasn't putting a whole lot of hand pressure on. If I tried to force it that far, I'm probably going to break either the tip of my screwdriver off, the screw head, or strip it out or something. So if it's an Allen, you're liable to screw it out. But when you impact, you're compressing all the material, all the metal and stuff like that, and the screw just goes a little bit easier. And 35, 38 years of doing this, I've never twisted a screw head off doing this. I'm real careful with it, obviously. But I've just put some pressure on it with my hand, not enough to start turning yet, start whacking it with a hammer, and you'd be surprised how much farther it goes. Sometimes not a lot, sometimes quite a bit. You're just compressing all the parts and stuff like that. So, but that's a great way to mount scope. You won't have them shoot loose that way. You very definitely get them shooting loose sometimes. Otherwise, especially if you're running a heavier scope or heavier recoiling rifle, everything just moves and flexes, and those screws can start coming out. Even Loctite, they can start backing out a little bit. So, but that's just a good way to ensure that they're in there tight. They're not gonna come loose. Nothing is over torqued or overstressed that way. You often have to do the same thing to unscrew them, take them back out again. That's a great way to just get things apart. Anyway, you don't worry about breaking your screwdriver tips off and all that stuff. But anyway, just a little bit of an aside there. That's just a nice way to mount, mount a scope on here. So, or to mount a base on here, I mean. Okay, the next step up is doing the rings. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rings out and get those mounted on the base in the position they need to be, and then we'll check how well the scope fits in those rings before we go any farther. So that'll be the next step I'll do after getting the base portion of this project done. So that's where I'm at right now. Anyway, follow along, like and subscribe, follow my channel here, because I keep posting these instructional videos like this, and glad to have you along. Thank you.